Emma Thompson walked slowly through the busy Manchester airport, her black leather briefcase in one hand and her phone in the other. She had just spent 3 days at an important law conference in London. Her mind was still full of new ideas about helping people who faced unfair treatment. The airport was crowded with travelers rushing to catch their flights. Families with children pulled heavy suitcases behind them. Business people talked loudly on their phones. Emma felt tired but happy. The conference had gone well, and she was excited to get back to her office. As she walked toward the security area, Emma noticed two airport security officers standing near the metal detectors. They wore dark blue uniforms with shiny badges. One was tall with short brown hair, and the other was shorter with a thick mustache. Their names were James Mitchell and Robert Clark, though Emma did not know this yet. The officers watched Emma as she approached. There was something cold in their eyes that made her feel uncomfortable. She had learned to recognize that look over her many years as a civil rights lawyer. It was the look of people who had already decided something negative about her before. Even speaking to her, Emma reached the security checkpoint and began removing her jacket and shoes like all the other passengers. She placed her briefcase on the conveyor belt and walked through the metal detector. The machine did not beep. Everything seemed normal. But then Officer Mitchell stepped forward with his partner close behind him. "Excuse me, Miss," he said in a voice that was not friendly at all. "We need to check your documents right now." Emma felt her heart skip a beat, but she kept her expression calm. She had dealt with situations like this before. "Of course, officer," she said politely. Reaching into her purse for her passport and boarding pass, she handed the documents to Officer Mitchell. Her passport was British, completely valid, and had many stamps from her travels to legal conferences around the world. Her boarding pass was for a flight to Edinburgh that would leave in 2 hours. Everything was perfectly in order. Officer Mitchell looked at the documents for a long time, turning the pages slowly. His partner, Officer Clark, stood with his arms crossed, staring at Emma as if she had done something wrong. Other passengers began to notice what was happening. Some stopped to watch, while others whispered to their travel companions. "These documents look suspicious to me," Officer Mitchell said loudly. "Even though there was clearly nothing wrong with them, we need to search your bag thoroughly." Emma's briefcase had already gone through the X-ray machine like everyone else's luggage. The security screen had shown nothing unusual inside. But Officer Clark pulled her briefcase off the conveyor belt anyway. "We need to check everything," he announced in a voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. More passengers stopped walking and began to stare. Emma felt her cheeks grow warm with embarrassment, but she kept her voice steady. "Of course, officers," she said calmly. "I have nothing to hide. Please go ahead and search whatever you need to search." Officer Clark opened her briefcase and began pulling out her legal documents, her laptop computer, and her personal items. He held up each item as if it might be dangerous. He examined her business cards, her conference materials, and even her small bottle of hand cream. Everything was completely normal and legal. The crowd of watching passengers grew larger. Emma could hear people whispering behind her. Some sounded confused about why she was being treated this way. Others seemed to assume she must have done something wrong. A few children pointed at her while their parents quickly pulled them away. Emma had been a lawyer for 15 years. She had defended people who were treated unfairly because of how they looked or where they came from. She had won important cases in court and had helped change unfair laws. But standing in that airport, surrounded by staring strangers, she felt small and powerless. The officers found absolutely nothing suspicious in her belongings. Her laptop contained only legal documents and conference presentations. Her papers were all related to her work helping people who faced discrimination. There was not a single item that could possibly be considered dangerous or illegal. But the officers were not finished with her yet. Officer Mitchell put his hand on his radio and spoke to someone Emma could not hear. Then he looked at her with cold and friendly eyes. "We need to detain you for further questioning," he declared loudly. The words echoed through the busy terminal. Like a gunshot, Emma felt the blood drain from her face. On what grounds? She asked quietly, though she already knew the answer. There were no legal grounds for detaining her. This was harassment, pure and simple. Officer Mitchell did not answer her question. Instead, he reached for the handcuffs attached to his belt. The metal gleamed under the bright airport lights. "Turn down and put your hands behind your back," he commanded. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut around Emma's wrists was the loudest sound she had ever heard. Passengers gasped in shock. Some people took out their phones and began recording what was happening. Emma's heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces. But she refused to cry in front of all these strangers. She had faced discrimination before, but never like this, never so publicly. With so many people watching and judging her, the humiliation burned in her chest like fire. "This is wrong, and you know it," Emma said quietly to the officers, her voice steady despite her pain. The small security office at Manchester Airport felt like a prison cell to Emma. The walls were painted a dull grey colour, and there was only one small window that looked out onto the busy runway. She sat on a hard plastic chair with her hands still locked in metal handcuffs behind her back. The cuffs were tight and uncomfortable, cutting into her wrists every time she moved. Officer Mitchell sat behind a metal desk, filling out paperwork. His partner, Officer Clark, stood by the door with his arms crossed, watching Emma as if she might try to escape. The room was silent except for the sound of Mitchell's pen scratching across the paper and the distant noise of airplanes taking off outside. Emma's shoulders ached from having her arms pulled back for so long. She had been sitting in this position for almost 30 minutes now. The officers had brought her to this office after handcuffing her in front of all those passengers. They had walked her through the terminal like she was a dangerous criminal, while people stared and whispered, "I would like to make my phone call now," Emma said quietly but firmly. She knew her rights as a citizen. Even in this terrible situation, Officer Mitchell looked up from his paperwork with an annoyed expression. "Phone call. This is not a police station, lady. This is airport security. Everyone has the right to contact someone when they are being detained," Emma replied calmly. "That is the law in this country." Officer Clark rolled his eyes and let out a loud sigh. "Just give her the phone. Mitchell, let her call whoever she wants. It won't change anything." Mitchell reached across his desk and picked up an old black telephone. He placed it on the desk in front of Emma, but she could not reach it with her hands cuffed behind her back. "You will have to dial the number for me," Emma said. "I cannot use my hands." Officer Mitchell grumbled under his breath, but picked up the phone again. "What number do you want to call?" Emma gave him a London phone number that she had memorized many years ago. It was a number she had called hundreds of times over the past decade. Though never in a situation like this, Mitchell dialed the number slowly, as if he was doing Emma a huge favor. The phone rang once, then twice. Emma held her breath, hoping that Patricia would answer. It was late in the afternoon, and court sessions were usually finished by this time of day. "Hello, this is Judge Patricia Hamilton speaking," came a clear, strong voice through the phone speaker. Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her entire body. Patricia Hamilton was not just any judge. She was one of the most important and respected judges in all of England. She had been Emma's teacher and mentor for more than 10 years. Patricia had helped Emma become the successful lawyer she was today. "Patricia, this is Emma Thompson," Emma said. speaking loudly so her voice would carry through the phone. At Manchester Airport, and I need your help." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then Judge Hamilton's voice came back, full of concern and worry. "Emma, what in the world is happening? You sound very distressed. Are you hurt?" Emma began to explain what had happened to her. She told Patricia about how the officers had stopped her for no reason, searched her belongings, and then handcuffed her in front of all the other passengers. She spoke calmly and clearly, the way she had been trained to present facts in court. As Emma was talking, she noticed something very interesting happening in the room. Officer Mitchell's face was slowly changing color. At first, he had looked bored and annoyed. But as Emma continued speaking and mentioning Judge Hamilton's name, his expression became more and more worried. Officer Clark noticed his partner's strange behavior. "What's wrong with you?" "Mitchell," he whispered, "you look like you've seen a ghost." But Mitchell was not paying attention to his partner anymore. He was staring at Emma with wide, frightened eyes. Clearly, he had heard of Judge Patricia Hamilton before. Anyone who worked in law enforcement in England knew that name. She was famous for being tough on people who broke the law or treated others unfairly. Judge Hamilton listened to Emma's entire story without interrupting. When Emma finished talking, there was another moment of silence. Then Judge Hamilton's voice came through the phone like thunder. "Put one of those officers on the phone immediately," she demanded. Her voice was no longer gentle and concerned. Now it was the voice of a judge who was very, very angry. Officer Mitchell's hands were shaking as he took the phone from Emma. His face had turned completely white, like he was about to be sick. "Why, yes, Your Honor," he stammered into the phone. "Officer Mitchell." Judge Hamilton's voice boomed through the speaker. "Do you realize that you have just handcuffed one of the most respected civil rights lawyers in this entire country? Do you understand the gravity of what you have done?" Mitchell looked across the room at his partner. Officer Clark was no longer standing confidently by the door. Now, he was sweating nervously and wiping his forehead with his sleeve. Both men suddenly understood that they had made a terrible, terrible mistake. "Remove those handcuffs from Ms. Thompson this very instant," Judge Hamilton commanded through the phone. "And then you will apologize to her properly." Officer Mitchell's hands were trembling so badly that he could barely work the key in the handcuff lock. Within seconds, Emma's hands were free. She rubbed her wrists gently, feeling the red marks where the metal had pressed into her skin. The officers mumbled quick apologies, but Emma knew it was too late. The damage had already been done. All those passengers had seen her being treated like a criminal. Some of them had even recorded the whole thing on their phones. By 6 o'clock that evening, Emma's story had traveled far beyond Manchester Airport. The passenger named Margaret Wilson had been standing in line behind Emma when the officers handcuffed her. Margaret had quickly taken out her phone and recorded the entire incident. She felt so upset by what she witnessed that she immediately posted the video on her social media accounts. Margaret wrote a long message with her video. "I watched a dignified woman be treated shamefully. Today at Manchester Airport, Emma Thompson showed more grace in those horrible moments than most of us could ever manage. This was wrong, and everyone needs to see what happened." Within 2 hours, Margaret's video had been shared by hundreds of people. By evening, thousands of people had watched it. They were shocked and angry about what they saw. Many people left comments expressing their support for Emma and their disappointment with how the airport officers had behaved. Someone created a hashtag called Justice for Emma, and it began spreading across all the social media platforms. People shared their own stories about times when they had been treated unfairly. Others posted messages of encouragement for Emma. The hashtag became so popular that it was soon trending nationwide, which meant it was one of the most talked about topics in the entire country. Emma sat in her small London apartment, completely unaware of what was happening online. She lived on the third floor of an old brick building in a quiet neighborhood. Her apartment was cozy and filled with law books, family photos, and plants that she tried to keep alive despite her busy schedule. She had arrived home feeling exhausted and emotionally drained. The red marks on her wrists were still visible from the handcuffs. Every time she looked at them, she remembered the feeling of metal clicking shut around her hands and the sound of passengers gasping in shock. Emma made herself a simple dinner and tried to watch television, but she could not concentrate. Her mind kept replaying the events at the airport over and over again. She wondered if she should have handled the situation differently, even though she knew she had done nothing wrong. Around 8 o'clock, Emma's phone began ringing. At first, she thought it might be her sister or a friend calling to check on her, but when she answered, it was a reporter from a local news station. "Miss Thompson, this is Sarah Davies from Channel 4 News. We would like to interview you about what happened at Manchester Airport today. The video has gone viral, and people are calling for justice." Emma was confused. "What video? I don't understand." The reporter explained about Margaret Wilson's recording and how it had spread across social media. Emma quickly opened her laptop and searched for her own name online. She was amazed to see hundreds of news articles, social media posts, and videos about her experience. Her phone rang again before she could finish reading. This time it was a reporter from a national newspaper. Then another call came from a different television station. Soon, Emma's phone was ringing constantly with interview requests from journalists all across the country. Emma felt overwhelmed by all the attention. She turned off her phone and sat quietly in her living room, trying to process everything that was happening. She had never been in the news before, except for articles about her legal work helping other people. The next morning, Emma's assistant, David Brown, arrived at her apartment with a stack of newspapers and a cup of tea. David was a young man with curly red hair who had worked with Emma for 3 years. He was always cheerful and optimistic, but today he looked worried. "Emma, have you seen the news?" David asked, spreading the newspapers across her kitchen table. "Your story is on the front page of every major paper in the country. The whole nation is talking about what happened to you." Emma looked at the newspaper headlines. Some said things like "lawyer humiliated at airport" and "discrimination caught on camera." There were photos of her being handcuffed, taken from Margaret Wilson's video. David sat down across from Emma and handed her the cup of tea. "The phone at our office has been ringing all morning," he said. "Reporters, supporters, other lawyers who want to help you. Everyone wants to know what you're going to do next." Emma walked to her apartment window and looked down at the busy street below. People were walking to work, getting on buses and living their normal daily lives. Most of them probably had no idea who she was or what had happened to her yesterday. But apparently, many others did know, and they cared about her story. Emma thought about all the times she had stood in courtrooms, fighting for people who had been treated unfairly. She had spent her entire career trying to make the world a more just and equal place. Now she found herself in a situation where she was the one who needed justice. "David," Emma said quietly, still looking out the window, "I want to turn this pain into purpose. I believe this happened for a reason." Her phone, which she had turned back on, buzzed with another call from a reporter. This time, instead of ignoring it, Emma took a deep breath and answered. "Yes, I will give you an interview," she told the surprised journalist. "But I want to talk about solutions, not just problems. I want to talk about how we can make sure this never happens to anyone else." 3 weeks had passed since the incident that changed Emma's life forever. During those weeks, she had given interviews to newspapers, television stations, and radio programs. She had received thousands of letters and emails from people all round the world who supported her. Some people had sent flowers to her office. Others had made donations to civil rights organizations in her name. But Emma had spent most of those 3 weeks thinking about what she really wanted to accomplish. She could have hired the best lawyers in England and sued Manchester Airport for millions of pounds. Many people had encouraged her to do exactly that. They said she deserved to be paid for the humiliation and pain she had suffered. Emma had also received calls from activists who wanted her to demand that officers Mitchell and Clark be fired from their jobs immediately. They argued that the two men should never be allowed to work in security again after what they had done to her. However, Emma had a different idea about how to handle the situation. She believed that simply punishing people or taking their money would not solve the real problem. The real problem was much bigger and more complicated than two officers making a bad decision at an airport. On a cold Tuesday morning in November, Emma walked into the same Manchester airport where she had been handcuffed 3 weeks earlier. This time, she was not carrying a suitcase or rushing to catch a flight. Instead, she was carrying a folder full of notes and ideas that she had been working on for days. The airport had arranged a special meeting in their largest conference room. Emma was surprised to see how many people had come to hear her speak. The room was completely full, with people standing along the walls because there were not enough chairs for everyone. Airport Director Helen Carter sat in the front row, looking nervous and worried. She was a middle-aged woman with grey hair who had been running the airport for over 10 years. Next to her sat several other airport managers, all wearing their best suits and looking very serious. Behind them sat dozens of airport employees. There were security officers, baggage handlers, ticket agents, and cleaning staff. Some of them looked curious about what Emma was going to say. Others looked uncomfortable, as if they were worried they might get in trouble. In the back of the room, Emma noticed officers Mitchell and Clark sitting together. They both looked much older than they had 3 weeks ago. Mitchell kept running his hands through his hair nervously, while Clark stared down at his shoes and avoided making eye contact with anyone. Several community leaders had also come to the meeting. There was the Mayor of Manchester, 2 members of Parliament, and representatives from various civil rights organizations. Local newspaper reporters sat with their notebooks ready, and television cameras were set up along the sides of the room. Emma walked to the front of the room and stood behind a small wooden podium. She looked out at all the faces staring back at her. For a moment, she remembered how it felt to stand in this same airport with handcuffs round her wrists while strangers stared at her. But now she felt strong and confident instead of humiliated and powerless. "Good morning, everyone," Emma began in a clear, calm voice. "I want to start by saying something that might surprise you. I could have sued this airport for millions of pounds. My lawyers told me I had an excellent case and could win a huge amount of money." The room was completely silent. Everyone was listening carefully to every word she said. "I could have also demanded that officers Mitchell and Clark lose their jobs," Emma continued. "Many people have told me that they should be fired immediately and never allowed to work in security again." She paused and looked directly at the 2 officers in the back of the room. They both looked terrified about what she might say next. "But that would not solve the real problem," Emma said firmly. "The real problem is not just 2 officers who made a bad decision. The real problem is that bias and prejudice still exist in our society. We cannot change people's hearts through lawsuits alone. We need education, understanding, and honest conversation." Emma opened her folder and pulled out 7 whole pages of notes. She had spent weeks researching and planning what she wanted to propose. I want to create a comprehensive training program for all airport staff, she announced. This program will include workshops about unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and respectful treatment of all passengers, regardless of their race, religion, or background. The audience began to murmur with interest. This was not what they had expected to hear from someone who had been treated so badly. Suddenly, Officer Mitchell raised his hand nervously. His face was red with embarrassment, and his voice shook when he spoke. "Miss Thompson," he said quietly, "I want to apologize to you again. I was completely wrong in how I treated you. I am ashamed of my actions, and I think about what I did every single day." Emma looked at him with kind, understanding eyes. She could see that he was genuinely sorry for what he had done. "Thank you, James," she replied gently. "Your honesty gives me hope. Are you willing to help make things better? Are you willing to be part of the solution?" Both officers nodded eagerly. "Yes," Mitchell said. "We want to help however we can." Airport Director Helen Carter stood up, looking amazed by what she was hearing. "Ms. Thompson, most people in your situation would want revenge, but you want reform." Emma smiled at her. "Revenge builds walls between people," she said, "but reform builds bridges." 6 months had passed since the terrible day at Manchester Airport, and the world looked completely different now. Emma stood in front of a large mirror in her London apartment, adjusting her blue dress before heading out to give another speech. She had given so many speeches over the past few months that she had lost count, but each one still felt important and meaningful to her. Manchester Airport had become famous across Europe, but not for the reasons anyone would have expected. Instead of being known as the place where a respected lawyer was treated badly, it had become known as the most welcoming and fair airport in all of England. Emma's training programs had been so successful that airports in France, Germany, Spain, and Italy were sending their staff to Manchester to learn how to treat passengers with respect and dignity. The training program that Emma had created was unlike anything that had ever been tried before. Instead of just telling people what not to do, it focused on helping them understand why treating everyone fairly was so important. Airport workers learned about different cultures and backgrounds. They practiced having difficult conversations. Most importantly, they learned to see each passenger as a real person with feelings, dreams, and fears, just like themselves. Officers Mitchell and Clark had become two of the most important teachers in the program at first. They had been terrified to speak in front of groups of people about their mistake. But Emma had encouraged them to share their stories, an example of how good people can sometimes make terrible decisions when they let fear, deep prejudice cloud their judgment. Today, Emma was going to speak at the Riverside Community Centre in Manchester. It was a place where young people from many different backgrounds came to learn, play, and spend time together safely. The centre served children whose families had come from all over the world, some from Africa, others from Asia, and some whose families had lived in England for many generations. Emma arrived at the community centre just as the sun was beginning to set. The building was old but well maintained, with colourful paintings covering the walls and the sound of children's laughter echoing through the hallways. She was greeted by Mrs. Sarah Johnson, the centre's director, who had organized today's event. "The children are so excited to meet you, Emma," Mrs. Johnson said as they walked toward the main hall. "Many of them have heard your story and see you as a hero. Some of them have faced their own challenges with people treating them unfairly because of how they look or where their families come from." The main hall was filled with about 50 young people, ranging in age from 10 to 18 years old. They sat in rows of folding chairs, all facing a small stage at the front of the room. Emma noticed that the audience was beautifully diverse, children with different skin colors, different styles of clothing, and different languages being whispered. Between friends' as Emma walked onto the stage, she spotted something that made her heart feel warm. In the third row, officers Mitchell and Clark sat with their wives and children. Over the past 6 months, they had become regular volunteers at community events like this one. They often spoke to young people about the importance of treating others with respect and learning from mistakes. Emma stepped up to the microphone and looked out at all the young faces staring back at her. She remembered being their age and feeling sometimes like the world was unfair or confusing. She wanted to give them hope and practical advice for dealing with difficult situations. Good evening, everyone. Emma began with a warm smile. I want to talk to you tonight about something very important. When someone treats you unfairly, and unfortunately, this will probably happen to most of you at some point in your lives, you have a choice to make. You can let anger consume you and make you bitter, or you can let love transform you and make you stronger. A young girl in the front row raised her hand. She looked to be about 12 years old, with curly brown hair and bright, intelligent eyes. My name is Lucy, she said when Emma called on her. But wasn't it hard not to be angry if someone handcuffed me in front of all those people? I think I would be furious. Emma smiled warmly at Lucy's honest question. Oh, Lucy, I was angry, she said. I was hurt and humiliated and embarrassed. I went home that night and cried for hours. I felt like the whole world had seen me being treated like a criminal, when I had done absolutely nothing wrong. The room was completely quiet. Everyone was listening carefully to every word Emma said. But then I realized something very important. Emma continued. Our pain can become our power if we choose to use it wisely. Instead of letting my anger make me bitter and hateful, I decided to use it as fuel to help make the world a better place for everyone. Emma's assistant, David Brown, who had been standing at the side of the room, approached the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced proudly, I would like you to know that Manchester Airport now has the highest passenger satisfaction rating in the entire country. People from all over the world are choosing to fly through Manchester because they know they will be treated with kindness and respect. The entire room erupted in applause. Children cheered and clapped their hands enthusiastically. Emma felt tears of joy forming in her eyes as she looked out at all these young people who represented the future of their country. After her speech ended, young Lucy approached Emma near the stage. Miss Thompson, she said shyly, I want to be a lawyer like you someday. I want to help people who are treated unfairly. Emma knelt down so she could look directly into Lucy's eyes. Then study hard in school, be kind to others, and never forget that every single person deserves dignity and respect, no matter what they look like or where they come from. As Emma walked home through the quiet streets of Manchester that evening, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. One terrible day had somehow become the foundation for countless better days, not just for her, but for thousands of other people as well. The message was clear. When we respond to hatred with love, to injustice with justice, and to pain with purpose, we can change the world one heart at a time. The end.